Welcome to another episode of Before You Kill Yourself with your host, Leo Flowers. Today's episode is brought to you by Forever Me Apparel, and I love it because they support the mission of Before You Kill Yourself podcast. Mental health affects everyone, either directly or indirectly. It's very unfortunate, and what's even worse is that no one is talking about it. At forevermeapparel.com, they are open and always looking to help support mental health. They want to supply everything from head to toe. It's always been and always will be about the people. Because without the people, we are just forever nothing. Forever Me Apparel has their newest collection out now. From beanies to shirts to hoodies to bags, they have it all shipped right to your door. You can find it all on forevermeapparel.com. They are doing a free giveaway for a suicide awareness t-shirt to a lucky winner today. Head on over to Forever Me Apparel and tag a friend that could use a suicide awareness t-shirt. They will pick a winner and DM you. Today's guest is Dr. Adrienne D. White. Dr. White is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Georgia with additional studies in marriage and family therapy, as well as a certification for Prepare Enrich premarital counseling. She completed her doctorate in counselor education and supervision at Mercer University. She holds credentials as a master's addiction counselor, certified anger management specialist, approved clinical supervisor, and a nationally certified counselor. Dr. White has been a Red Cross volunteer for the past 3 years, facilitating reconnection workshops with services to military personnel and families. Today's episode is a doozy. You're going to love this. We focus primarily on anger management. That's right. How do we stop punching holes in the walls, ladies and gentlemen? How do we stop beating ourselves up? It's so easy to do. How do we stop that? How do I stop that? How do we focus on the bigger picture? And so today we talk about how anger is a surface level emotion, and there are underlying emotions under the anger that if we can click to those, then we can start to have some clarity, calm, and tranquility in ourselves, and also bring that to our relationship. And we share with you how to manage your anger, right? She talks about how there's always more to your anger. And then we even get into how anger is tied to ambiguous loss. And we explain what that is in the episode. And ambiguous loss are those things that aren't tangible. So we get into there. We get into signs of anger. And I know that a lot of times when we think of signs of anger, it just seems obvious. It's obvious that person. But there's some subtle signs that we are angry. And if we're not aware of it, we may think it's something else, right? And we have the cure for anger in this episode. And she breaks down people in relationships into two groups. A lot of times when two people are arguing or a couple is arguing, they're grouped as one person, and then the other group or the other person has another name. And then how do those two people come together so that they can resolve the conflict? And we get into so many other things of how to cleanse your emotional palate. Sometimes we're walking around with energy and emotions from preceding things. We haven't cleansed that palate so that we can show up and be present for whatever we're tending to at this moment. It's one of the reasons why I always work out first thing in the morning. It's part of me cleansing the palate. And with that, you can always go to thrivewithleo.com for one-on-one coaching with yours truly. Let's get to tomorrow together. With that said, let's jump into the episode. Dr. White, first of all, I don't know if I've had anybody on a podcast with all these letters after their name. I mean, you got CEO, PhD, LPC, MAC. I thought the MAC was like a football. I played in the MA. I played in the MAC. Then you got CAMS. I thought it was a drafting system. ACS, NC. You got all the things.
Well, as you know, counseling is a very, very diverse field, and people come in with so many different concerns. You know, a master's in counseling is kind of a generalist degree. And so the more experience I gain, the more, I guess, knowledge and experience I knew I needed to get. So I know we probably don't have time to go over all of them, but one of them that actually made a big difference for me personally and professionally is the CAMS, and that's a certification as an anger management specialist. And so with that credential, the training talked a lot about techniques and behavior responses to help a person dealing with anger, but it also really kind of normalized this whole thing called anger because, you know, it's stigmatized. Like, oh, there goes the angry Black woman, or you're getting angry again. Are you PMSing? There's always something negative attached to anger. And so one of the things, like I said, personally and professionally for me, with the alphabet soup behind my name, that anger management piece, it kind of helped me, like I said, personally, because I started noticing that there are different tells before I get angry, like my nostrils will flare. And so the more you learn about yourself, the more you can connect with others. But yeah, it's a lot. But it's, in my humble opinion, biased opinion, it's a good thing to continue to learn and grow and see different ways I can connect with people.
Well, and what I love about that, too, is to let other people know to stay out my way. You see my nostrils flaring. You know what this is. You know what's about to happen. So ask me one more question. And then
it don't always work
either
like that.
I got to go or you got to go. But somebody got to go. You know, I love that we started off with anger for a couple reasons. One is I had someone on the podcast and I was asking them because they were talking about things that happened in their childhood. And I was like, I asked them, I said, I assume that at some point that anger helped fuel you in some ways. And the response was anger has never helped them create anything or do anything productive. And I found the opposite. I found that anger, the right amount of anger, right, has helped me to be constructive at times and not always destructive. What say ye?
I agree. Like I said, anger is normal. And the weird thing about anger is that it can't live and breathe without primary emotions. So I don't see anger as a bad or a good thing. I just say it's healthy. If you meet somebody, even say a therapist, that says they never get angry, that's somebody I'm going to give a side eye to. So yes, I agree. Anger can motivate you, but what's really behind that anger? So if I think about myself, a reason I might get angry is if I'm embarrassed, or if I'm uncomfortable, if I feel called out. And so, yeah, those things can make you motivated if you can kind of pinpoint the root of the anger, kind of like a tree. We can't just look at the branches. We have to get down to the root. And that's what those anger outbursts or comments or behaviors, sometimes, like you said, it can be a good thing. But if we don't understand the root, then we're not necessarily going to bear good fruit.
Oh, okay. So someone gets angry, right? Right now, a lot of people are getting angry with each other in relationships or friendships or even roommates. I was reading something that they were talking about domestic violence being up, and it's not just between couples. It's violence towards children, but also between roommates. I never really thought about domestic violence being a roommate type of situation. So if someone is angry, and then they're able to identify the root cause, say embarrassment, then where do they go from there?
It depends on, I guess, how deep rooted it is. So if, say it's me, I'm in this roommate conflict, that's a very interesting point. When we think about domestic violence, we usually we think about couples, but a lot of people are angry right now, rightfully so. So let's say it's a roommate thing because of COVID-19, amongst other things, it's not safe or advised to go out. Whereas any other time I might have, I guess, some outdoor activities that I might normally do, or I might go to hang out at friend's house, which is ill advised right now. So now I'm in the house with this person who may have done something to upset me, and I don't have an outlet. And so instead of lashing out or being a passive aggressive patty, well, now I'm going to wash all the dishes except yours and line them up. Or I'm going to drink the milk down to like the last sip because I'm mad at something that you've done. Now it can escalate to either verbal or physical violence. But if I recognize that anger is actually coming from being embarrassed, then one, I can look at why I'm embarrassed, because if I'm embarrassed about something, again, that whole root thing, that has to go a little bit deeper. So what am I embarrassed about? I didn't pay my rent on time. I'm embarrassed because my hours have gotten cut. What is that about? Is it because I feel as though I haven't saved enough money? These are all very personal things that make us embarrassed. So if I walk up to a supermodel and say you're fat, if they feel good within themselves, they're not going to feel embarrassed by my comment. Does that make sense? Everything about anger is personal. It has to do with our experiences, words that make us feel uncomfortable. So individually, it really just depends on what, I guess, coping skills that I have. I like music personally. So if a good song can kind of take me away and give me time to think about it, that's good. Sometimes I need to get outside of my head. So calling a good friend to sometimes help remind me of how awesome I am. That can be a temporary cure for embarrassment or things like that. But again, it's a very personal thing. Of course, I'm biased as a therapist. My number one thing I want to scream from the rooftop is, let me deal you some hope. Give us a call, shoot us an email, talk to somebody about this if this is something that's happening too often. More often than not, you're getting angry. More often than not, you're using words that you regret later. More often than not, you're wanting to put pause on people. It's a good time to reach out to a therapist.
I love that idea of more often than not versus always. That whole black and white either or type of thinking or phrasing it. It's are you noticing that it's more often than not, or most of the times, or oftentimes, to kind of frame the behavior? Is there, when we talk about managing emotions, we talked about anger and embarrassment. A lot of people, especially students, and I know we're in the summertime right now, but I think this will probably air closer towards the school year. A lot of students end up ending their lives over their grades. And I would assume there's like an embarrassment or fear of how their parents are going to respond because of that. How do we give them hope when when the outcome doesn't meet the expectation?
Yeah, that is a hard one. It's really sad, but very true that we're working with students, and like you said, it depends on your program, because some programs go all summer long. But as far as parents being kind of conditioned to, hey, we're coming into the summer, what have you been doing? That does put a tremendous amount of pressure on students. That does, like you said, increase the rates and the likelihood of suicide. I think that level of embarrassment is something that people unfortunately kind of lock in to tunnel vision, the right now. And so one of the things that off or on the couch, I would want to talk to that person about, who's laser focused on this outcome, is what's the goal? Because we know, depending on what their actual major is or what their career outcome they're looking for, is most of my jobs, they're not looking at, well, geez, you got a C in this class and you had to take it over. The end goal is the degree. And so helping them focus on the bigger picture, that this might be disappointing, but they can repeat the class or they can get some support. I think that's one of the challenging things just about our culture, the American culture in general, is that we often have this kind of bootstrapping mentality that it's embarrassing, unnecessary, or a sign of weakness to get help. And I do think that affects our students as well. So much pressure on grades when, like I said, I can't think of any job that I specifically got that went over line for line each grade that I had. But when that's all you know, then it puts this laser focus on this particular outcome.
You're right, because I mean, going back to what we were saying in the beginning, like you have all these letters after you, but ain't none of them grades.
None,
right? Ain't none of them like A in his class, B in that class. It's just certifications, degrees, and we just assume that you did what the course required for you to get through there, and we're gonna assume the best. We're assuming the best of you in each of that. You did your best in each one of these, A or C, but really it's like you said, and two, it comes down to not just grades, it comes down to experience of like how much experience does this person have, because we know a lot of people who are educated but lack experience in their field, and you don't even come close to lacking experience. I see that you've worked with the military personnel and their families. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. So on my father's side of the family, most all of the men went into different branches of the military. And that was something that I kind of toyed with upon completing high school, that idea. And so since I did not serve, I wanted a way to support the people who support my freedom. And so I volunteer with the Red Cross, their services to the armed forces. And so usually after a deployment, they have a ceremony called a yellow ribbon ceremony. And part of what I do with the Red Cross is we can't technically call it group counseling, but we provide different groups to talk about possible symptoms they might experience, whether it's post-traumatic stress syndrome, depression, which may include some symptoms that thoughts of suicide. We talk about anger management, which is, of course, one of my favorites. And we also talk about reconnecting with children who've been used to talking to you on a screen or on a phone for a small amount of time, and now you're in their space and their routine is different. So that's part of the work I do with military personnel. And then I've been fortunate because I am on TRICARE insurance panel that I have saw some veterans in my private practice. And of course, I have a few veterans in my life.
Now, why you said anger management is one of your favorite? Why anger management? Why that of all the things that one can specialize in? Why that one?
Because anger, I found, is people are more ready to talk about being angry than they are to talk about being embarrassed, to talk about being disappointed, to talk about being hurt, confused, depressed. And then I think part of that is the way our society is set up, especially for men, actually. And so it's ironic that a lot of times when I work with men who may have been recommended to come to me, or they see that I have that specialty, and it's like, oh, I've been angry. And I talk to them and they may have some symptoms that fit more with anxiety. But even from the time, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but from the time you're 2, for young men, boys are told, don't cry, man up, things like that. And so guys are kind of conditioned that it's okay to get in fights, it's okay to express anger, but it's not okay to say you're disappointed. It's not okay to say you're hurt.
Absolutely. From the time I was a kid, and I never got the message of don't cry, but I was ignored when I cried. It was you could tell that there was almost a look of disgust on the faces of the adults when you cried as a kid. For the most part, when I was in kindergarten, I remember I got stung by a bee and I was crying, and that was okay. But as I got older, you definitely picked up from society that you if you were gonna cry, you didn't cry or you had to do that, somewhere off in a corner somewhere.
Absolutely. And I mean, and it's not just men, girls are told be a big girl, things like that. But like I said, anger to me is just, it's easier to talk about it. And when you think about different layers of culture, even with us being in 2020 and therapists being on so many different shows, it's still pretty taboo for some cultures. So someone saying I'm going to a therapist, the looks they may get is, what's wrong with you? Do you have a diagnosis? Are you on medication? But if they say, oh, I had to go to anger management, it's almost like a rite of passage. Like, oh, don't mess with Leo. He had to go to anger management. He doesn't mess around. So people are more comfortable talking about those things, even though, like I said, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The anger piece is always more to anger. And
Go ahead.
The thing about anger is your body has a reaction to when you're angry. So it's physiological things that I can talk about as well, whether it's you feel your heart rate increasing. Some of us literally feel hot when we're angry. Like I shared earlier, my nostrils flare. So when it comes to deeper emotions, like experiencing disappointment or abandonment, it's sometimes harder to talk about what our body does when that happens. But almost everybody, like clockwork, if I asked when's the last time you got angry, it's so easy for people to share because that's unfortunately how we're socialized. Like, it turns into a funny story.
That word disappointment and abandonment, I love that you brought that up because I can see in couples and friendships and even thinking about how you were parented of so many feelings of disappointment as you look back and you're like, yeah, wow, my parents didn't prepare me for anything or taught me all the wrong things or whatever. And I think that is a tough emotion to identify, that and abandonment, because we don't have that conversation and that's not something that's part of our vernacular. Are there ways for us to determine or what can cause feelings of abandonment and disappointment? I guess I think that's the question to ask.
Sure. I mean, again, that's a very personal thing, but the thing about abandonment, it can be tied to grief, and there's not always a hallmark card for different griefs that people experience. So someone decided not to stay in a relationship. There's usually not a hallmark card for that. But that can be what we call an ambiguous loss, where no one necessarily died, but it's a death of an idea. Even losing a job could feel like a form of abandonment. But when we go super deep, which you mentioned, I guess when it comes to like parents and family, again, that's something very personal too. So let's say I wanted to make a decision on if I should take a job or not. And I'm really leaning on this particular parent that I felt like hasn't necessarily been emotionally there for me. And I'm giving them this opportunity to help me make a life-changing decision. And their response is, you know what? You got it. You'll figure it out. That could feel like emotional abandonment. And I think that's what's so hard about mental health and understanding mental wellness is that Something that's not a big deal for me might be a huge deal for you. And something that might not be a big deal for you might be earth shattering, might feel like abandonment for me. So unfortunately, having more conversations about different things is really important, and really understanding ourselves individually and how we respond to things, taking that time to slow down to understand how we feel about certain things is really, really important. Having good people in your space, friends, significant others that want to hear you is really, really, really important.
Wow. That whole thing about abandonment and the idea of like, you'll figure it out. So many of us have heard that. Oh, you'll figure it out. You know, like whether it's from your boss, employees, parents, siblings, that idea of you'll figure it out. I could definitely see how that could feel like abandonment. Like you're not going to help me. I'm saying that I need help, and you'll
Right.
figure it out. Like, wow.
And the flip side is people may have said that to anyone feeling like they're empowering them. I said you'll figure it out because I didn't want to taint your experience because I know how brilliant you are. But that doesn't necessarily mean the person will receive it that way.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about, you said ambiguous loss.
Ambiguous loss.
I feel like there's so much there. Can we unpack that? What does that mean, ambiguous loss?
So with ambiguous loss, that basically means that you've lost something that's not tangible. It's not something you can put your hands on. And like I said, I like to call it those things that aren't Hallmark cards. So if a family member passes away, we usually have a general sympathy card that we can get from Walgreens or wherever. But when you lose an opportunity, that can be considered an ambiguous loss because you never know what you could have had, if that makes sense. So say, for example, I'm going after this job and I get the job, but because of COVID, they cancel it. So well-intended family or friends are probably like, oh, it wasn't meant to be. It's in God's hands now. You know, something better is coming out there. But if I've already planned in my mind what this actual experience was going to mean for me, if I've already made financial plans for this particular job, what people might not understand is that I could grieve that job that I never had, that opportunity that I never had, just like as a person. So forth and so on, from either relationships. We talked about abandonment briefly, but betrayal. So say you're in a relationship and you're thinking this person has been faithful, and you find out not only have they not been faithful, but they've had a long-term affair. 6-7 months. So this idea of me being with this partner who respects certain boundaries in our relationship, that's the idea of us having a relationship that is physically and emotionally just us, that ideal is now dead. And to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen a Hallmark card that says, hey, I'm sorry that your significant other who you love their dirty draws has now cheated on you. That's an ambiguous loss, whereas well-intended family and friends are saying, hey, it's better that you know now. That person didn't deserve you. You know, we all have good intentions of our families and friends, but not understanding the different layers of loss that person experienced, not just what you can see, but also the things that you can't see. This idea of how I perceive my relationship, how I perceive trust is now dead. Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's crazy is, as you're talking, I was looking up cards for betrayal and job loss, and there are now cards for betrayal and job loss. And I mean, they're not by Hallmark. You know, I think that's not really their brand.
Understandable. But they have sympathy cards. You would have to really do some digging or get on Etsy to get specific cards for some of the things we would consider ambiguous loss.
Wow, they even have cards for inevitable betrayal. Like you just
Ooh.
Oh, shots are fired out here in these streets. It's getting rough. But yeah, it seems like the people, the industry are catching up to these ambiguous losses and acknowledging them and normalizing them on some level. Of course, I had to dig deep. I had to go and do a deep web search for those cards. You're not going to find those in Walmart or Target. But they're out there.
But they're there. They're out there. That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Now, do you have, because, if somebody's going to an anger management class, usually there's some type of blueprint, acronym, something to help people frame how to cope with anger management. It's like with in AA, there's like the a HALT, like are you hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, to address. Is there a similar thing with anger management or blueprint or a way that people can progress from 1 to 5?
Ooh, that's a good question. Right offhand, not necessarily. A lot of the work I do with individuals is with people with anger issues is individual. So I haven't done groups in a long time because, like you said, people's anger could vary. And, energy can be transferable. So unless you can screen very carefully what levels of anger people are, it's been more helpful for me to work with individuals one-on-one. So there's not necessarily an acronym that I work from, but I'm sure there are some out there.
Now, I'm just now at the age of 44 coming to grips with the fact that I'm angry. And I've been angry, and I didn't really identify it as such. I identified it mostly as like depressed or hurt or anxious. But as I get older, I'm becoming more in touch with my anger. Are there signs of anger that people typically aren't aware of? Is it because I was reading this book, The Road Less Traveled, and the therapist was identifying that their client was either not showing up to sessions or showing up late because they were angry. And typically we don't think about anger in such a way. We think about it in like a physical, like punching of the wall, yelling, screaming, but not in the omission of oneself or just not showing up for appointments. Are there other signs of anger that we typically wouldn't identify as that person's angry?
Sure. And again, that depends on the person too, because that example you gave is really good because there's so many layers to it. So you're 100% right. And usually when I'm working with people with anger, we kind of talk about some of the anger styles. And so TV media talks about the overt expressions of anger, like you mentioned, but passive aggressiveness, so avoidance, purposely being late are signs of anger, could be signs of anger. They also could be signs of anxiety. So when you mention, trying to differentiate from, is this anger, or is this depression, is this anxiety, is this fatigue? Sometimes it's all, sometimes it's only one. So that's the tricky thing. The symptoms of anger and other, symptoms can overlap. So you can be angry and silent. Those are the people who can be scary. And so we kind of call them stuffers, the people who get quiet and kind of, quote unquote, just take it. I think most of us know at least one person who it just seems like they get very eerily quiet when things are happening. And so that unfortunately can be a sign of anger. But it also could be a sign of depression. Oversleeping, overeating could be signs of anger, because again, we're stuffing down these emotions, these feelings that we feel like we can't control down. And again, they overlap with depression as well.
I love that you brought up oversleeping and overeating as signs of depression, because I think that for the most part, we just chalk up overeating to anxiety or just depression or a lack of willpower. But never had I really thought about overeating as something that could be tied to anger. But I guess that would go into the realm of emotional eating, right? If you're angry,
Absolutely.
happy, whatever it is.
Absolutely. Because you're activating the same, I guess, fight or flight response, whether you're angry or anxious. So our body doesn't know the difference between you being angry or in a life or death situation, you being anxious or you being in a life or death situation. And so the blood that's usually going to our fingers and toes, it's the blood that's usually going actually to our brain and to our stomach to process that donut I had for breakfast. Now it's going to my fingers and toes, so I can either run like heck or fight like heck. And that's either if I'm mad or if I'm anxious or nervous about something. Or for my students, if a test is coming up, the test is not even today, but it's coming up, it could activate that fight or flight response. And for some people, it makes you feel like you're already full. So some people lose their appetite, or some people, their appetite increase because they've activated this fight or flight response and their body is tired and burnt off so much energy and it needs some more.
So when someone's feeling disappointed, say in a relationship, right? We click back the layers of anger and they recognize that, wow, I just feel really disappointed. You said you were going to show up or you said you were going to do something and you didn't do it. And now I'm disappointed in you, especially we see this in relationships or friendships. How do you communicate? I think part of what feeds anger, especially for me, when I look back, part of what fed my anger was realizing I'm angry, realizing I'm disappointed, but feeling like I didn't know how to communicate it in a way that wouldn't destroy the relationship further. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So you reminded me of something when you shared that. So I can't think of any anger acronyms, but we have a lot of cliches. And one of them is that the angriest person is the person who feels most unheard. And that is so true. When you feel like your back is up against the wall and you can't communicate the way you need to feel effective or to be heard, that perpetuates anger so much. And so what you describe is very, very accurate. Unfortunately, it happens all the time. And that's basically the cure to anger is effective communication. And so we look at kind of the scales. So passive is when someone is feeling something about feeling disappointed, feeling hurt, feeling abandoned, feeling taken advantage of, and they physically do or say nothing. Or then we have the passive aggressive communication style where I'm trying to communicate to you that I'm upset, but I'm not going to tell you directly. I'm going to try to tell you through my actions. So if we're in a relationship and I'm feeling like you said you were going to pick me up and you didn't, and I end up having to get a ride, instead of me communicating that with you, I got a ride, I Ubered, I did what I need to do. But guess what? Now when I cook tonight, I'm cooking just for me. And then the sweet spot is assertive communication, where you can talk about your experience, like what you felt or how a certain behavior made you feel, and try to get a solution or at least give yourself the opportunity to be heard. And so the tipping point is, how can you be assertive and not aggressive? And that's when, we're saying or doing things to physically or verbally act out our disappointment versus being direct and about how an experience made us feel. Because like we talked about earlier, sometimes, most of the times, it's not It's not the sender's intentions to make us feel disappointed, abandoned, things like that. But if we don't communicate that in an assertive way, in a direct way, it can basically cause a cycle of anger and disappointment and hurt.
Yeah, because a lot of times what we get into is a you said, but you said, and but you
Right.
said, right? It's this back and forth thing of what someone said versus what they're saying. We
Absolutely.
get caught in the past, and we don't take time to just be present and ground ourselves in the moment, in a moment's communication. When we talk about effective communication and a person saying, all right, well, I felt disappointed. I could also see the other person go, well, I felt disappointed. A lot of it is so much back and forth. How do, like, for couples, because I know that you also are, you got letters for premarital
Yes.
counseling and therapy. How do we stop that back and forth? What's the
goodness.
key? Talk to me.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point you make there. The whole communication, the back and forth. Couples is a big thing. It's a big thing. But in general, effective communication, where it's not creating a back and forth, you have to be ready for it. So I'll try my best to start with couples. When it comes for my work with couples, my experience is that there's usually a runner and a chaser in a lot of couples, which makes communication kind of difficult. So you have the person who outwardly it looks like they're running away from a difficult conversation, but that's because they're the person who's the thinker that needs time to think about what they're going to say so that they can compose their thoughts, and communicate effectively. Those are sometimes the people who aren't good on the fly. That's my runner. And then we have the chaser who's like, no, we need to talk about this right now. I don't want to go to bed. I don't want to go to IHOP. I don't want to go anywhere until we talk about this. And they're usually chasing the person either physically into the next room, like, hey, we got to talk about this, chasing them out the door to get some resolution. And they're the person who's good at talking about their thoughts and their feelings on the fly. And so that's understanding that kind of helps create a groundwork when working with couples, or just, if you're in a couple, thinking about or conceptualizing how is this going to work? How are we going to communicate effectively? So a little, I guess, trick that I use is when I found that there's a runner and a chaser in the couple, that we kind of come up with a realistic deadline to have a conversation, and they usually have what I call a safe word. So, sometimes people in the bedroom have safe words like pineapples or what have you for when something's too much. And so I think with couples, that's important too. So gauging when someone's ready or in a good space to talk about something. And so I've been very fortunate to have couples that have been willing to take this journey with me. I've had safe words like mac and cheese or Ray Donovan, and that's their way, chaser's way of asking the runner are you ready to have this conversation? Because if one person is ready and the other is not, that makes it a breeding ground for miscommunication and that back and forth. Well, I feel, well, I felt, and I felt. And then we have just some, simple techniques when we're talking to somebody about how they feel. One, no one can make you feel anything. We feel certain things based on our experiences. And so if I wanted to communicate with my significant other that, I felt disappointed about something, I have to own my feelings. I can't say you made me disappointed because you did not take my car to get the oil change. But I can own that I felt disappointed because I was hopeful that he would follow up on getting my oil change. And again, if he's having a great day and something awesome happened at work, or he just beat his top score on the PlayStation, for me to come in and say, I'm really disappointed in you. So timing is key. And that's basically, depending on the type of couple it is, when I work with couples, I try to gauge, but these are things that people can do without therapy to kind of gauge if you have a significant other who's usually ready to talk about things right away, or if they're needing some time in preparation. Because having anxious feelings alone can cause an argument. If I'm thinking things well and you come and tell me that I've let you down, that anxiety might drive the conversation versus, hey, I do want to talk about something with you later. Let me know when you're ready for a mac and cheese, or, if that's our code word for a talk, then that kind of gives me time to emotionally prepare for it.
Now, I appreciate you sharing that. That's so valuable to say, I feel a certain way, and to take ownership for feelings instead of blaming the other person for how we feel. Because it sounds like what you're saying is that if I feel disappointed, it's because I felt disappointed so many times in my past. And now this has triggered that or reactivated. But it was already there. The feeling of disappointment was already there for me.
Absolutely.
Now,
definitely.
I want to ask you this, because I was noticing this last night, actually. I'm reading Malcolm X, and I knew I shouldn't have been reading Malcolm X before bed, because it's not like a happy bedtime story,
No, it's not.
It's not the thing. It's not the thing that you would read to your children, right? And I'm reading this book, and I was angered by what was taking place and what he was like. His anger, I triggered my anger, and then I realized I went down this spiral of thinking of moments where I felt angry and disempowered. Also, is that the danger of media, music, certain things, in that if you're listening to a song or watching a movie where there's anger or trauma, then it triggers the moments in your life when you felt angry and traumatized? Is that what's happening?
Absolutely. I mean, music, media, they're all very, very, very powerful. And I mean, we have so much more to go on research just thinking about it. I can't remember which country, but that's why they have it. I want to say in Japan that under the age of 12, they're not letting the children have iPads other than for educational purposes. So there's so many layers to that. What we read, what we put in our body isn't just food. So even talking to people who have negative messages, which could be people that we love, i.e. family members, can influence how we communicate with other people, can trigger anger for us that we're not necessarily aware of. So definitely music, what we read, even the memes. I'm a big meme connoisseur, that we read can color the way we receive messages and the way we feel about certain things.
So are we supposed to not listen to music and watch movies? Like, how do we process that? One of the things that my girlfriend and I do when we're watching something is we'll pause it and talk about it. Like we're watching The Last Dance, Michael Jordan's, or the Bulls documentary. And I forget what was happening, but we paused and was like, what would you do? And what would I do? Like, we kind of processed it with each other. That's how we like to consume it. And even with Ozarks, there was so much happening in Ozarks, and so many crazy decisions that were being made, between no spoilers, don't worry.
Okay.
But that were made in the relationship. And so I would pause it and be like, would you do that? What I do, you know, like we would have these conversations to kind of check in with each other. But so our like we can't walk the earth untriggered, right? Like it's just
Absolutely.
with billboards and music and all the, you know, your family members sending you all types of crazy news, and my mom gaslighting me every Tuesday. I don't know what it is about Tuesdays.
Well, the world is not devoid of negative things, period. So it's not like I'm suggesting we just avoid any movies or shows with violence or any, you know, songs that are saying negative things. It's just, I guess, handle with care. So I like McDonald's every now and then, but I'm not going to eat McDonald's breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, all day. So what things we're putting in our body, whether it's food or spiritual, like the music we're listening to, the movies we watch, just keeping in our mind that they can affect how we see the world and how we view things. And then, you know, even after I have a session, I'm gonna basically cleanse my emotional palate. So I'm not taking in my conversation with client X into client Y. So if you know you listen to something that's kind of heavy, then maybe give yourself a few moments of silence and think about something positive. If you know that you like to listen to music that's talking about smacking someone upside the head and punching them with the butt of your gun, then maybe, like you said with the Malcolm X book, maybe that's not something you want to listen to as soon as you wake up or right before you go to bed. So just, like I said, handling with care. So knowing what things feel good for you, that are motivating to you, and knowing what things affect your psyche and your emotions, and putting them in their proper place, and having barriers for your sacred time. Like when you start your day, that is special time. How you start your day can help navigate how the rest of your day is going to go, and how you end your day is significant too. So that's all I would say about that. We don't live in a vacuum or in a tunnel where we can be untouched by the ugliness of the world. And unfortunately, that would actually make it even worse if we tried to create a space where we had no idea of all the bad, because then we wouldn't be prepared for it emotionally or physically or whatever that looks like. I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. You know, I'm fortunate that me and my girl do not watch the news at all. We do read it, but you know, we don't get all that yelling and screaming, carrying on back and forth that you see on CNN and the other news outlets. So we definitely try to limit it in that capacity, and we try to wake up, and we both work out in the morning. You know, it's kind of like we do a little something for ourselves before when we wake up, and then even before bed, you know, we'll stretch or watch something funny, you know, and lighthearted before we go to bed. And then, of course, I read Malcolm X, which triggers it all over. So it's not a flawless system. It's not
you know, listen to something that's gonna kind of get you in a more relaxed mood, whatever that looks like to you.
Now, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think would help people who are struggling to manage their emotions, manage their anger? Are there any strategies or tools or things that you think would be beneficial?
Yes and no. So I have all of these ideas and tips that I think are helpful. How you manage your stress has got to be an individual thing. One of my personal experiences with being a therapist is so many times people have come to me inundated with, well, you know, Dr. Phil said this, and this theologian said that, and this person said that, and Ayana said this will fix my life. But you really have to take the time to get to know you. So for you and your girlfriend, for example, working out is amazing in the morning. Some people in the morning, waking up is the last thing that they want to do. But they could paint in the morning if that makes them feel good, or going for a walk, a very brief walk, is something that might be good for them. I tell my clients, and friends sometimes. I don't care if it's picking boogers for 5 minutes. If that makes you feel relaxed, it has to be something unique and special for you. It has to be something that makes you feel good, not just this idea of checking a box because someone said on this amazing podcast that if you listen to Mozart in the morning, that's going to help you be less stressed. You have to figure out things that make you feel good. Now, I can give some things that has been helpful to myself or clients in the past. Aromatherapy is something super small. Lavender, mint, infusing different smells in your life when you're feeling stressed has been helpful for some people. It's been annoying as hell for others. So it has to be something personal, and it's not a one size fits all. So I shared earlier, music is my love. I have probably the worst singing voice ever, but singing in the shower is something that kind of gets me motivated for the day. I kind of rotate it maybe every 3 weeks, my kind of morning mix of music that I listen to, like in my morning routine when I'm getting ready to start my day. That's something that feels good for me. It might annoy the hell out of somebody else, and I just want to normalize that what might work for your significant other, what might work for your dad or your sister may not work for you, and that's not a bad thing. That roommate that I'm hopeful now that you listen to this, you don't want to choke them anymore. What works for them might not work for you. But having an accountability partner, someone who loves you and cares enough about you to check in, who will say to me, hey, Adrienne, had you listened to your morning mix today? Or have you ate something? I know that sometimes you like to skip lunch and it seems like you're getting a little hangry. It's important to have people in your circle, in your space that loves you and care enough about you that you can tell them that you need them to hold you accountable to doing at least one self-care item a day. And that could be a bubble bath. It could be candles. It could be skating. It just has to be something that you like to do.
I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. White, for taking this time out to be on the podcast. Last question. I ask this of all my guests, because I always imagine there's one person listening who may be on the precipice of ending their life. Before you kill yourself, what would you say to them, Dr. White?
It's not true. Whatever depression is telling you, it is not true. This world and we will not be better off without you. It is not true.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. Thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in. Remember, this podcast is not a substitute for you reaching out to get help. For you calling the 1-800-SUICIDE number 273-TALK. For you going to see a therapist, you can go to thrivewithleo.com for one-on-one coaching with yours truly. Let's get to tomorrow together. Please, Dr. White, tell people where they can find you.
You can find us at Hope Dealer ATL on Instagram or www.thehopedealeratl.com.
Thank you so much, Dr. White.
Thank you for having me.
As a reminder, today's episode was brought to you by Forever Me Apparel. They are doing a free giveaway for a suicide awareness t-shirt to a lucky winner today. Head on over to Forever Me Apparel and tag a friend that could use a suicide awareness t-shirt. They will pick a winner and DM you. Forever Me Apparel has their newest collection out now. From beanies to t-shirts to hoodies to bags, they have it all shipped right to your door. You can find all of it on forevermeapparel.com.